Hey everybody. So just wanted to do a tutorial for Lightroom Classic tutorial for beginners, a little developing for tonal correction, color correction. And before I jump into Lightroom, just wanted to remind you to subscribe for Photoshop and Lightroom tutorials and my live streams on my YouTube. So youtube.com, Digital Art Drew. That's Digital Art Drew. You can either get there directly in the URL or do a search for Digital Art Drew. Thank you very much. And now I'm going to jump into Lightroom. Here I am, and I'm going full screen. Okay, great. So I'm in Lightroom Classic, and you can see in the top right, I'm in the library module. So I just simply click on the develop module. And with my images, I have a lens correction. I put at the top, and I just click on remove chromatic aberration. So it removes any kind of aberration on the edges of the image. And I check marked enable profile corrections. So as I do that, once you do that, you see that the lens profile shows up. So it shows me that this was a simple photo taken with an iPhone, and it seems to read the color better that way. Then I go to transform, and under transform, I just check to see if it's, on the right horizon level, if it's leveled. So I either hit the auto button, and in this case, nothing moved. It was centered nicely, and it's, as it says, a balanced level. And then I can also click level itself to level it. But in this case, it's fine. So all the changes I want to do now are going to be in the basic panel. So I just click on basic. And then just so you know, it's set to color. But if you were to click on where it says black and white in the top right, it would convert that to a black and white image. I'm just going to do tonal and color correction. So I'm going to stay in color. So the first thing is you have the white balance eyedropper. Once you click on it, you can pull it out from the panel on the right. It reads the RGB breakdowns of color around your image. So if you felt there was like a color cast, you could click, and then as you can see, I'll do a before and after, hitting the Y key on a Mac. I guess the Y key on a PC as well. And then what happens is you get the before and after. As you can see, it's warm on the left here, and then on the right, it's cooler. So that simple click of the white balance tool gave it a nice kind of fix for the color cast. And then over on the right, you can see that there's the temperature slider. So you can decide if you want it to be cooler or warmer. In this case, I might go back a little bit warmer to the right, and then tint, more green, more magenta. So maybe slightly more green to focus on the cilantro and the jalapeno peppers. And then I will move the exposure slider just a little bit to the right, like a plus 55 to open up the overall exposure. I will move the contrast, say to 22, 23. But then there's some white highlight areas that are being blown out. So I move the highlight slider to the left, minus, and that kind of brings back information, especially you can see in this, I guess, area of cheese over here. It comes back down to around 46. You can see more detail and a better tonal range for that area. Shadows, I would decide, do I want to darken the shadows for contrast or open them up so you can see more information? So left of the shadow slider is minus, and therefore would make it darker. And then to the right would be plus, and you would be opening up the shadows. So in this case, maybe a little opening. And then whites, I might take a little to the right, plus 10 or 11 to just kind of give it a punch, a little highlight, or brightest brights punch. And then blacks, I might take a negative -4. So then when you get to the presence part of the panel, texture, when you move that to the right, it gives a little bit of a sharpen. Obviously, if you take it too far, it gets a bit gritty looking. You can double click on any tab and it brings you back to the default of 0. If I'm in clarity, that's what we used to use. When you take that to the right, it gets pretty sharpened and pretty gritty fast. So as you can see, not only does it change the sharpness, but also it gets darker, kind of grungier. So if you like that look, then clarity might be a good option, but I tend to use texture. So I'll just go back to texture and just move that to like a 25 on the right. Then once again, if I hit the Y key, I can see before and after. And you can just see on the one on the right, it breathes a little better, a little bit more colorful looking. And then still, I have another little section that I go to down at the bottom. There is Vibrance and Saturation. So with Vibrance, that focuses on the areas that are lacking in saturation. And so when you move the Vibrance slider to the right, you get a little boost to those colors. Obviously, if you go to the left, you would be basically desaturating to a degree, not totally, but to minus 100, you still have a bit of color suggestion. Once again, I can double click the tab to go back to 0. Now, just to show you, saturation affects everything. So I take that to the right. It gets pretty neon pretty quick. That's a little crazy. So I just click the double click on the tab. I go back to 0. So I go back to Vibrance and just move that about 10, plus 10, or maybe plus 13 to the right. The image looks pretty good to me. If I did feel that I needed more of a tonal range fix, I can go down to the tone curve. And then with the tone curve, you have a couple options. If you are in the first one, that is the parametric curve, you can either kind of click in the graph to make changes for the tonal range. You have your shadows at the bottom, your midtones, darks technically in the middle, and then the higher you go, you have highlights and lights. But you can see that there's sliders underneath as well. So even though you're in a curve, you can use sliders when using Lightroom Classic. So if I take the highlight slider to the right, I'd be opening it up. If I pull it to the left, I'm overall bringing it down. And then same thing goes with all the other sliders. Lights to the right, brighter. Lights to the left, darker. Darks to the right would open them up. To the left would darken them. I just double click the tabs, go back to 0. And then shadow, same thing. If I go to left, darker. If I go to the right, you would make it brighter. But I tend to, if I'm going to use curves, I like to use them the way that they have been built a long time ago. So the direct grid. So I click on the point curve. And so the second icon at the top, point curve, I can go in and I can just choose to go to, say, midtones, pull up or down. So if I go up, it's lighter. If I go down, it's darkening the midtone range into the darks. If I go to higher up, that would be affecting my highlights. So just a little bit. And then the darks here at the bottom open up. If I pull up or pull down, would make it darker. And you always want to use subtle movements for these. And then, of course, if you were to go into red, green, or blue, you'd be going to the red, green, or blue channels. So with red, if I go here and I click in the middle, I pull down, you'd be adding green. If I pull up, you'd obviously be adding the opposite of red. With these, they're obviously very sensitive, so I tend to use them very minimally for just a little bit of tweak of color to my image. You do see that there's also HSL. So you could go to the hue area and you could change the quality of the color. So if it's a green, you could choose a green slider. And if you move it to the right, it becomes almost like a kind of a bluish green, kind of artificial looking. And if you move it to the left, it becomes more like a yellowish green. So in this case, I might even go a little bit left, like -3. And then anytime you see a little circle, like a target circle in any of these panels, it's a great tool. It's a target adjustment tool, and it's related to whatever you're using. So if it's hue, saturation, luminance, if I'm in the hue, well, in this case, I'll switch to saturation. It's still there, target adjustment tool. Now I can decide to increase or decrease the saturation of any area that I click on. So I click and pull down, I'm decreasing the red saturation. If I click and pull up after I've chosen that tool, I can increase the saturation to the reds. And it reads color better than your eye. So I might think that's red, and it's telling me that it's more a mixture of yellow and orange. So that's another reason why I like the target adjustment tool. But you'll notice if I go back to tone curve and even go to point, there is also a target adjustment tool. So I could just select the different range of tone on my image, click and pull up or down to adjust my darks, midtones, or highlights with the target adjustment tool. So I like that. And then when I get to a certain point, I can just hit the G key for grid view. And I'm back to another series of food photos. Double click, and I've just got a bigger view of it. And if I go back to develop and I do a Command C on a Mac, Control C on a PC, you have this copy settings feature. And then it's asking, what do you want to copy? So treatment and profile, yes. Basic, pretty much everything I did. A little bit of tone curve, HSL. Color grading, I didn't even do, so I could uncheck that if I want. I didn't really do sharpening, but I'll just keep it on in case it has a default. I didn't do anything with lens correction or transform so much, so that's fine. And I usually keep calibration on. So for these basics of what I've done, this range, I, Command C or Control C to get here. When you're in the develop module, I click on copy, and then I can go back, hit G. I can open up any other kind of similar photo and do a Command V. Got to be in the develop module. Command V, and then it takes the similar settings that you've changed. In this case, it's a little bluish or green, so I might tweak it a bit, but it gives me a good starting point. Here's another one. So a little Thai shrimp dish. If I do Command V, it gives a nice brightening, a little bit sharpening, contrast to it overall. So just always remember that when you work on your first image and you do a Command C, Control C on a PC, when you're in the develop module, then you will get the copy settings panel, and you can choose which elements that you want to be able to copy and then be able to paste onto any other image. I'm a big fan of that. So yeah, so hope that was helpful. And I will jump back to StreamYard. So yeah, hope that was helpful, and a little Lightroom Classic tutorial for beginners, a little tonal correction, color correction. And once again, don't be shy. Please subscribe for Photoshop and Lightroom tutorials and my live streams on my YouTube, Digital Art Drew. Thank you very much.